Well, I think I'll introduce the panel after Jakob has made his opening remarks. Are you going to stand to make your remarks, Jakob?
Okay.
Yeah. Jakob is director of the German-American Institute in Heidelberg.
Welcome. Following all these numbers, initiatives, and we just heard, made me pretty humble. I come from a very little place, from a country that until recently considered the most important issue the purity of beer. And I actually, not long ago, I was in Strasbourg, and I was listening in local dialect to a guy who was emphasizing his distinction with one sentence. He said, "I have no neighbor." There you see the opposite of our issue, which coincides today, certainly the topic today, with my daily work. The German-American Institute is an institute that is an offspring of the Second World War, founded by Americans, in order to encourage Germans for internationalism, for democracy, and so interdependence, in a way, has been the issue of daily work of my workplace. In the old days, for such an event, you would have, and Christophorus would agree with this, you would have started with an invocation of the muses. And the German-American Institute, in a way, documents a muse that was guiding the Americans after Second World War, in a way reflects the learning of American foreign policy of the First World War. Remember, after the First World War, they decided, the Allied victorious nations decided to punish, to teach by punishment or revenge the defeatist. And even though that is understandable and probably justifiable, it led to the rise of something terrible in our country. So after the Second World War, they had a new idea, and that was re-education. And our place is a product of that thinking. And what it means is you believe in the arts, you believe in a free language, you believe in concerts, you believe generally in stories, in language, in the arts. And it has become a success story. Germany has never been as peaceful as after Second World War. And you can imagine how puzzled we are when we read about America, and I'm daily concerned with America. If you read the ongoing popularity and the supported propaganda for a lady that is not our muse, that is Ayn Rand. And if you see America in the most prominent arenas worshipping a lady that came from Russia, which is no crime, she came from totalitarian communism. She dropped communism, but in a way worshipped and tried to preach a totalitarian individualism. And that is something that came up again and again today, and that is something that is worrying me personally, but I think in the headlines generally. There is another muse that I would favor, and who I think is probably the lady that we should all mention here. You are familiar with the grand storyteller and the grand story of education, of re-education. There is the story of a monstrous ruler with monstrous rules who decides to choose every evening a young woman, spends the night with her, and chops off her head the next morning. Now, he goes on, and certainly this is not a sustainable issue for a country or for a state or a people. A young woman decides to confront him and to face him and to fight him. And how does she do it? She believes, I mean, there are other examples. You know, the Bible, Judith cuts off the head of Holofernes. This lady believes in storytelling, in language, in imagery. And it takes almost 3 years to turn this monstrous individual into a human being. The language, the storytelling, in the end, it is a narrative that could be sort of the concept of the Declaration of Interdependence. And I have heard not long ago a Nobel Prize winner who suggested Scheherazade is actually the concept for the whole universe. When 9/11 occurred, the German-American Institute in Heidelberg became the shrine of the solidarity, or the local solidarity and empathy for the victims and their families, for New York, for the whole of America. And then we all heard this desperate question of, why do they hate us? And we sat down and we thought, you know, to give this desperate question a proper answer, we have to be very careful. And we came back to our roots, the roots of the foundation, this American foundation in Heidelberg, and we thought, education. And we have to start from scratch, start from the very small, the kids, Lily, and applying cultural means to our decision. The West, that's my deepest belief, has to start from scratch and prepare their kids for a globalized world. And we opened this kindergarten, a few kids. 2 years ago, we bought the first major house. 4 days ago, we bought a second one and opened it. We have now about 200 kids. What we teach them is, apart from the language of their parents, one common language. In this case, it's English. We teach them manners, tolerance, respect, mutual respect. We give them a chance to develop both hemispheres, to support the arts as well as the science, the physical as well as the intellectual. And I tell you, we do a lot of original programming, conferences, concerts. Every year we start actually with a series of concerts with young, excellent musicians from Juilliard School or Curtis Music School. But nothing has been as satisfactory, as encouraging as these 3-year-olds who are so passionate and so open and blank sheets of interdependence. So, good news from Heidelberg, interdependence is growing.
Thank you, Jakob. Now, I'd like to introduce our panel, and I'll follow the order in the program. You can read more about people in the notes that you have. But in the middle here, we have Mary Lou Aleskie, who's the founder and president of the Capital Institute and runs a major cultural festival at Yale University. On the far end, we have James Early, who's director of culture and policy at the Smithsonian Institution. At the far end here, we have Pathik, who's president of the Interdependence Committee in Nepal. And then on my immediate left, we have Daphné Romy, who's the founder of the Académie sans Frontières and is from Switzerland. And then Eileen Woods, to my right, who is senior partner and artistic director of Haring Woods Studio, and so is a cultural practitioner working in the UK. So it's a wonderful panel, and I'll invite each of the panelists to respond, and then we can have something of a discussion around issues of culture and how we can use culture to promote interdependence. So, Mary Lou, if you start the ball rolling.
Okay, great, thank you. I'm the executive director of an international performing arts festival that happens in New Haven, Connecticut. And I wanted to talk a little bit about what that is because it very much picks up on the theme that we heard in our introduction from Ms. Hirsch-Levitt, or Levitt-Hirsch. A festival, the arts, are very much an active form of citizenship making that reaches well beyond borders. It's a collaborative process, it's an interdependent process, it's a community making process. So the festival I run in New Haven looks to bring performing arts organizations, performing artists together with scholars and thinkers and our community, where we reach out into the world and bring those people together with our local voices to not just have a cause and effect in terms of observer and creator, but to have a common playing field where we all come together in a broad engagement across borders that creates an opportunity for people to sit shoulder to shoulder in an act of kind of an opportunity to practice what it means to be in the public realm together. And I would venture to say that that's very much what the Levitt Pavilions attempt to do in terms of bringing people together across borders, real and imagined, and have them share common experiences that speak to our hearts and move us forward together. And the resonance of that is not just a kind of moment in space, but it's one that creates a sense of community, shared self-esteem and pride in one's city, in one's neighbors, in one's neighborhood. And that's a very, very powerful way of bringing people together, because we all know that the arts provide us probably the deepest form of communication without words that we can possibly have. So my festival, 80% of what we do is free and takes place in a public park called the New Haven Green, which is a historic destination. Dates back, we'll be celebrating our 375th year. And it is essentially our community or New England's living room. And those performances that happen there give us an opportunity to also understand each other in a way that has us engage with scholars and thinkers and talk about themes that emerge. So what do we do to actually transfer that experience into something that's really practical and useful? Well, first of all, I will tell you, and I'm going to be crass enough to talk a little bit about money, because I think if there's ever a thing that brings us together or divides us, it can be money. And one of the things that we've learned at the festival is that this interdependent, inclusive way of being is also an economic powerhouse, because if we all are in it together and we're all sharing shoulder to shoulder, we now have 17 years of studies at our organization that shows that economic impact is generated by being together, and that's good for a city. And when you bring that tide up, you bring it up for everyone. So that's one kind of useful tool in terms of the arts and interdependence. The other thing is that it's not often that you see diplomacy in action in a way that actually changes lives. And there's a little known program that's just emerged from our State Department that I think everyone here should know about. And it's a project called Center Stage. And our Secretary of State had the idea of identifying that smart diplomacy had to be about creating understanding about people in our own country. And so she went about and found artists from particular areas of the world that are misunderstood in America, who were living in America, and had them go to those countries and find their peers, and created almost reverse exchange programs that brought artists from, and it turned out to be Indonesia, Pakistan, and Haiti into our main streets, and connected through the New England Foundation for the Arts with presenters like my organization that had has an acumen for connecting international and cultures and people. So we had an opportunity to welcome the equivalent of the Beatles' visit to Shea Stadium for people from Lahore, Pakistan, with a band called Noori. And they were joined by an American-based Indian band called Red Bharat. And right there on our New Haven Green, 375 years old, the Urdu Hindi tradition met the Punjabi Sikh tradition and danced. And it was a powerful and lasting moment that actually happened over and over again around our country after we launched the project. So I'm going to stop there, but we'll be around and have more of a conversation, and actually I would love to hear more concrete examples that you may know about that we could build on, because shared ideas are great ideas. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Mary Lou. James.
Thank you. I want to draw a somewhat larger global context to the issue of cultural perspectives and interdependence. Whereas often we talk about art as synonymous with culture, I want to suggest that we need to have a deeper conversation of understanding art as a subcategory of culture, and that we perhaps give particular attention to art when we talk about culture because of the extraordinary role that artists, as individuals and as collective groups, play in our society. So that's a kind of nomenclature, a definitional question that I think we need to continue to think about. I also think we need to consider putting the issue of culture and art connected in what I and some others have referred to as real cultural politique. We generally think about artists, dancers, poets, sense makers, who we call intellectuals, as interesting sidebars after the more serious issues of economics and warfare. It's a sharp contrast given that the contemporary world, the conflicts at levels of scale are so much tied into different ways of knowing and doing, different kinds of historically evolved imaginations and expressions, but yet we continue to be subject too often to this ironic dichotomy of hard power and soft power. So hard power is about the serious stuff, economics and war to preserve that. And after the days of victories, or after the 8-hour day, when we don't have to deal with so many serious things, we go to the opera, or we go to the ballet, or we go to jazz tap, or we go to hip hop as a kind of sidebar. Now, I'd like for you to contrast that with a real cultural politique that dates back to 1947, I think was the founding of the United Nations, and UNESCO, the United Nations Educational and Scientific Cultural Organization, in which we have, at a level of global scale, perhaps the most significant engagement of interdependence, both in terms of positive and conflictual issues in the area of culture and the arts. I'd like for you to also consider, since we are not just in Los Angeles, but the United States, that notwithstanding some very positive steps recently with the US State Department, for many years we, along with the Brits starting 1984-85, stepped outside of UNESCO because of the New World Information Order, in which these lesser developed countries were complaining that satellite broadcast into their countries pervade imagination, cultural expressions, news interpretations, contrary to their own ability to amplify their own imaginations and their own voices. I want to draw some contrast to broaden our consideration here a little. Hard and soft culture. Well, consider that UNESCO puts forth that culture is a transversal human issue. That is, the imagination, creativity, productivity runs horizontally across all of the life-defining elements of health, welfare, warfare, economics, whereas our tendency is to discuss culture and the arts as a kind of sidebar, soft power versus hard power. Real cultural politique. So think about culture as transversal. Think about culture also as organic and participatory from all communities. We tend to look at arts and culture as those individuals on the screen, on the stage, who write books. I talk about intellectuals as sense makers. I don't know anybody who does not make sense. Now, we can debate how solid, how wide, how comparative. Benjamin Barber, people like ourselves, we get paid as capital I sense makers, capital I intellectuals. But I don't think we want to juxtapose ourselves against the organic ability of people who may not read and write, but who express profound knowledge and aesthetics in other forms, in their basket making, in their dances, in their songs. They have different kinds of codes that we don't have a currency in, or certainly an ability to perform ourselves. These are juxtapositions that I think, as we talk about interdependence, that we need to think about. Also consider that UNESCO, this global forum, which I hope that we will become more involved with, particularly from this nation, talks about the goal of development is culture. It is not material accumulation. But far too often when we again talk about arts, culture, parks, and the like, we're not thinking transversally, nor are we thinking about the spiritual or the welfare, if you will, of people. Money is important. We would all like for our books, our poems, our dances to make millions and millions of dollars. But in the first instance, the reason that artists and the reason that intellectual interpreters put forth these expressions is to make meaning and feeling of security and interconnectedness. So this is a larger context, again, that I want us to think then about the citizen artist. And as Ben has perhaps been the foremost proponent, not necessarily with this exact terminology, but certainly with the content of this, of the citizen intellectual, as opposed to the performative intellectual. We have now in the public space the public intellectual, in which we, the audience, are thought to be the empty heads, look and strong gaze, not thinking about our own sense-making ability, our own imagination, our own creativity, but in the gaze of the other. Our father, Harry Belafonte, the man with the wispy voice, I just spoke to him a few days ago, has recently criticized Beyonce and Jay-Z. Now, what he's saying is that we have to have more responsible, socially responsible artists. One would argue, if you contrast Benjamin Barber with most intellectuals in this country, we've got to have more socially responsible intellectuals. We are too caught up in the gaze, albeit a powerful attraction in these expressive forms and in these intellectual interpretations. And therein legitimate for us to give acknowledgement to them. But far too narrow is what I want to suggest in the sense of a real cultural politic, when people are killing each other at levels of scale over what is their conception of the omnipotent. What is your language versus my language, although phenotypically we look the same and you would not be able to distinguish us except in the modes of our imagination and our expression. And so that those of us who work in culture and work in the arts is perhaps the most resonant dimension of what we call the cultural arena, I think we are challenged to think in broader terms. And let me conclude then by giving a pressing example. And that is the role of the Palestinian people who have decided to go through, of all places in the interconnected world, UNESCO, in order to be able to foreground their peoplehood at a stage when the US State Department and many countries in Europe are not clear, to be generous to them, and this is being overly generous to them, of what is the path forward. I raise this issue to show the significance of the culture makers and the image makers in this global world, not as soft power, but really as the context, or as I would like to say, or certainly as the transversal bar, the horizontal bar on which these other life-defining elements should be considered. And I think that is the challenge before us as we talk about the role of culture in interdependence, and keeping in mind that interdependence, as Benjamin Barber has conceptualized it, has always had the imaginative, the creative, the expressive as the context in which we saw it today with this young group. I went over to the young drumming corps and asked if I might photograph them. And then I asked them, what did their name mean? Our world. And if we can see in them poets who will be presidents, dancers who will be bankers, dancers or drummers who will tap down arm dealing, then I think we take ourselves at a level of scale of seriousness beyond the performative that we need to. Otherwise, we will be used and manipulated for narrow perspectives of cultural diplomacy, albeit they interesting and good projects, but they are really not maximizing who the image makers, the culture makers are with regard to where the world could go in positive terms.
Thank you. James. Thank you very much. Haring.
My introduction. Yeah. Shall I? Hello. I would like to express my ideas on Nepalese culture, world culture, and Nepalese situation, political situation, especially political crisis and constitutional crisis that is existing in Nepal these days. We are a small nation, less developed, in between giant countries, India in the south, China in the north. Now practicing for democracy, we fought against kingship in 2006, and that is already thrown up. Now we wanted democracy, but it is not working well. It is in trap. Constitution Assembly was created 4 years ago, but now it is dissolved. Local bodies election is not done. Since then, it has been almost 4 decades. Local bodies election is not done, and Constitution Assembly is not working. High Court had decided for a fresh election, but the government is not planning well for a new election for CA. In such a situation, we are very hardly working to make the nation in a straight position to work for democracy. And we Nepalese people highly tolerant to each others, however we are from different castes, from different religions, from different ethnic communities, from different tribes. We are in harmony. We were in harmony. But some of the political leaders gave unnecessary push to some communities to be popular. False popularity cannot work well, could not work well, and people wanted a lot of voices, their voices with a lot of demands which the nation could not provide to them. At that time, there was no law and order in my country that was in danger. Unnecessarily, people were arrested, beaten. Strikes disturbed the factories, developmental work. Peace was disturbed. At that time, even the Constitution Assembly was dissolved suddenly by the Prime Minister, Dr. Baburam Bhattarai, who holds the highest position of the nation is the Prime Minister from working point of view. However, from ceremonial point of view, there is President. President by law cannot do anything else. The Prime Minister called for new election, but without any rules and regulations, without any procedures. There was no, which could not come in effect. That was a problem. And we are asking for either for new election, fair election, or restoration of Constitution Assembly. In this situation, we want foreign support for our cause, because we don't want any Prime Minister or any party to rule us without our mandate for 20 or 25 years more. I am telling so because Prachanda is a large party leader, many times told that Dr. Baburam Bhattarai can rule for 20 or more than 20 years. Who can do what? It is we who are in power. We are in the majority. They say in this way, it is not good. They have no special majority. However, they are the largest party in the country. We are interdependent. I am here before you all people from around the world, working for democracy, working for interdependence, working for each other, sharing our ideas to work together for the betterment of the world. And we are there in a corner to the east, small country, less developed country, in pressurized situation. And how can you think of us and how can you help us of us? I will bring some message from you, being inspired from you. We will go there and work for democracy, work for new culture, for democracy, as we have to establish new culture, because the party in the name of proletarians, political party, is not working for the proletarians, is not working for the workers, is not working for the whole people. In the name of one caste identity or in the name of one group identity, they are demanding for federal states, naming for federal states. One caste identity is not good, because there are many castes, there are many tribes, there are many speech communities, there are many people who differ to them, there are many ethnicities, and they have also their voices. Therefore, we should look for some common ground name for federal states. We are trying to go into federal state system, federal democratic republics, and in naming, they are quarreling, unnecessary quarrel. And especially the ruling party did not listen to others' opinion for common identity. And this is the main point that helped dissolve the Constitution Assembly, which was very important. which was able to throw off the kingship which had ruled for many years, for more than 240 years. But now CA is dissolved. That must be restored, either that must be restored or free election must be called for. From practice point of view, even if that is called by the Prime Minister, that cannot be practical because other parties are not giving consensus, are not doing okay with them because they want to see common voice, common identity for federal states. They want new government on the basis of consensus. Not only one party, like a dictators, cannot work well. Therefore, they are requesting to dissolve the government. They are requesting to the president or the prime minister also to dissolve the government of Dr. Baburam Bhattarai and to remake and make a new government on the basis of consensus of all the prominent parties. And unless it is done, no good situation will be created in Nepal from political point of view. And another thing, I would like to express you how I joined Interdependence movement. In 2007, I found an article, very impressive article by Sondra Myers with a book. I wrote to her, how impressive you are. Then she wrote an email to me in reply to hers. This idea was brought by Professor Ben Barber. He is the main idea maker. This is the born child of Professor Barber, not mine. She said, not hers. And I work with him, she said. And she also invited me to her university, the University of Scranton, for a goodwill visit. I visited there. Another lady I found there, Elizabeth Berkhauser, with the chairperson of Hexagon Art Project. And I joined my students to the project. I called my friends to consult interdependence activities and principals in my city, town, Butwal, of more than a dozen, 14 or 15 principals from different schools and higher secondary schools and some college principals. We gathered together and decided to celebrate Interdependence Day. Every year it has been working for bringing people together from all over the world for the betterment of the world. Yes, the 6 points are very good for us to make the world better and even to make our nation better, hand in hand with the others from other parts of the world, from other ends of the world. In this way, I started to work with Sondra Myers, to work with Elizabeth Berkhauser, and also with our honorable professor, Dr. Benjamin R. Baba.
Thank you, Haring. Thank you very much. Daphné.
Yeah, not so long ago, I was in your neighboring country, Dr. Pathik. I was in India, the big one, the big country. And there I was attending a conference on education for peace and harmony. And it was supposed to be an intellectual conference. But in India, it's never completely intellectual. And in the evenings, we were entertained by our colleagues from the University of Sardar Shahar in the middle of Rajasthan in the desert. And these colleagues actually performed for us. They were, I would say, intellectuals who were performing, you know, as amateurs. Okay, so it's exactly what you were describing. I mean, you were advocating, James. And I thought that was not fair, that our colleagues were doing all this work and we were just sitting and enjoying it. But I'm a very poor artist myself, I have to admit. And the only thing I can do, and I'm very amateur in this, is belly dancing, because I started taking classes. So I said the only thing I could do is that, and the ladies said that would be great because we love belly dancing, but we're not allowed. This is not considered correct in Rajasthan that a woman would perform. But if you do it as a foreigner, of course we will join very gladly, because we can't leave you on your own. And so you have to imagine that I was on a stage like this one in a full room, and actually went on stage, and I am a very poor belly dancer, I promise. I am really miserable. When I told that to my teacher back in Geneva, she was appalled that I dare do that. Anyways, I went on stage, danced, and was joined by these women. And the next day, I was the front page of most newspapers in India. And I was invited in schools. I was invited by many schools because they wanted to know that very funny lady who actually they saw it as a mark of respect, and that's how I meant it to. And in these schools, I also discovered that these kids, at the beginning of each morning, have a session, of course, a religious session where they pay tribute to all the religions, not only their own. And they read news about what's happening in the rest of the world in English to their friends, and then in Hindi. And after that, they sang Imagine. And I have never experienced something that moving. And this is where I really discovered how much, the arts, no matter what, can really bring people together. My belly dancing brought me to them, and their music brought them to my heart forever. So that's something I wanted to tell you. That's my Scheherazade story for today. More seriously, yesterday I was in front of a different audience. I was at the Norco prison. And there I was asked to erase the walls in a certain way for inmates, some of them having been in prison for the past 15, 20 years. And I was asked to speak about multiculturalism in Europe to these inmates. And this is part of a project by a friend of mine, Professor Renford Rees, who believes in rehabilitation through education. And I had to perform this Scheherazade duty again of trying to make them imagine things that they've never seen. I mean, they'd never heard about Switzerland or France or Berlin, or they had heard about it, but it was an abstract phenomenon, and I had to bring that. So this is the second point where storytelling could probably be a way to describe our interference into my interference into this into this panel. And because I know we're short of time, I'm not going to read all my points, but I would like to finish with one element. I am indeed the founder of Académie sans Frontières and another group called Social Linguists on Facebook. And this is a group that we have 700 members, but we're extremely interconnected, and we have members from literally all over the world. And through them, I got in contact with several indigenous population leaders throughout the world, actually, and discovered that one way for the indigenous people to make it into the 21st century and 22nd and 23rd was actually to completely integrate into the cities today. So nowadays you have rock groups in Quechua, in Peru. And you have the same in Maori in New Zealand. And I think these are examples of another kind of empowerment of people and another way of being engaged in society. So yes, indeed, I am an interdependence activist, and I really believe that through art, but through art at an informal level, and really in the best of our capacities, and in my case they are limited, I think we can share a lot, and we should think about it in the future. Thank you.
Thank you. Eileen.
Thank you. I think it's interesting to see that there's a new type of stage presentation, a new trend in stage presentations, and it's called the empty chair. And I don't know if you can see that behind us there is an empty chair, which is not by design. It seems, I think it's completely by default. But I'm sitting here thinking, so who would I like to have sitting in this chair? And I'd like to have an artist called Christo. And I don't know if... Does anyone know of the artist Christo, who worked with his wife, Jean-Claude? And Jean-Claude died a few years ago, and Christo is carrying on. Christo is best known for doing very, very large, long-term projects that, in an arts, visual arts sense, could be a definition of interdependence, because Christo brings together government and individuals, funders, environmentalists, everyone you could possibly imagine, to make pieces of art that last for only a short period of time, usually only 2 weeks, but change people's lives for many, 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 many years. So that's who I've invited to be our guest chairperson. And the reason Christo is a hero of mine is his work is in public space, and that's been my interest for many, many years, and that's what brought Ben Barber and myself together with my team, where we produced a piece of work, an extended piece of work, which is called The Art of Common Space. And we were looking at the notion of the democracy of public space. And I'm very careful when I use that term, because I'm not convinced about it, but it's something that we sort of strive for. And I was thinking how the Levitt Foundation, I was very pleased that they are part of this exercise this year, is they are a living example of the democracy of public space, and how the arts can create a situation where people from different backgrounds and different socio-economic and cultural backgrounds can stand together within an open space and experience an art form, and the very nature of them being from different, their differences change how they receive the performance, what their perception is. And this notion of different people standing together in a democratic situation is something that a lot of artists are working on. And one of the points that it brings up is our civil liberties, and how new legislation is eroding our civil liberties and our ability to congregate, whether it's for protest, for fun, for entertainment, and how the notion of interdependence and congregation in public spaces is changing very radically, and it's a very subversive activity. And the idea of the definition of, say, public space and private space is also being merged, it's being blurred and blended, and where your ability to congregate and do whatever you want to do in a public space is changing through new bylaws, new legislation, and most of us don't even realize that that's going on. Then coming from that, the animation of public space, another of my heroes is Joseph Beuys. He's a German artist who is sadly no longer working. He's died some years ago. Had anybody heard of Joseph Beuys? If you haven't, it's Beauy's. It's someone to discover. And he had the notion of social sculpture, where whatever you do, or everyone is an artist, and everything you do can be an art form, and that's something that informs my work a lot. And that made me think about this gathering here today. And as I'm looking at you, this kind of example of tribal, you could call it a tribal or socially cultural activity, where everyone is either sitting alone, and that's their statement, or you're sitting with your own people. You're sitting with people who you trust and who you know. And that's how people behave. That's a very natural characteristic. But I'm wondering the difference between activities and creative activities in open public spaces and in a traditional arts cultural environment like here is how different your experience of today's activities would be if you weren't sitting beside your own people, your own trusted friends or colleagues. And it could be interesting to see in our afternoons after the break, or interested in the next set of activities, if you made the effort to be more interdependent in this audience and sit beside someone you don't know and see how that your experience of the rest of today's activities is informed by that democracy of public space.
Thanks, Eileen. Now, my interest in all this is as a professor who teaches the next generation of people who will be working in the international sphere as cultural diplomats and public diplomats. And I'm very glad to see that a number of my students are here. So great to see you here.
They're together.
Yes, all sitting together in a line. But some of them have only been together a week, so they're still exploring this space. And it's nice to see them as a tribe. I think that's progress. But as we're looking at ways in which we can use culture to reach out between countries and to promote interdependence, one of the issues that comes up is a problem of hierarchy, that not all cultures operate equally in our world, not all cultures command equal space, and despite the excellent work that UNESCO does, part of the reason it needs to do that work is because some cultures force out the space of others, and some assume a dominant position and others are marginalized. So what I'd like the panel to consider in the time we have left is how do we avoid, if we're reaching out with culture, how do we avoid recreating hierarchies that might somehow continue to marginalize people? So who'd like to jump in on that?
Yeah, definitely, because one aspect I would have liked to mention before, but you're giving me a perfect opportunity, is the idea of cultural landscapes. And this is something that we are more and more witnessing in the cities, different signs, different tags, different posters in different languages, and artistic very often, and how we can integrate this into our system of values and into a proper research. That's called landscapes in some cases, referring to languages, and the idea of landscape, which is a UNESCO value actually, taking landscape in a very urban meaning as much as in terms of diversity is something that is worth exploring, and maybe that's an answer to your question.
Yeah. Marilyn?
It's a really, really interesting question, and I will tell you that in our own experience, many countries who have a hard time competing with a Big 8 structure and want to promote their country, their identity, their culture, but don't have traditional ways of doing it, are stepping up to the plate and putting their weight behind their artists. And I'm thinking of places like Taiwan, which I think only France recognizes as a distinct diplomatic being, but is promoting their artists so fervently around the world that, in fact, a number of their companies are now becoming leaders in dance, in theater, and in taking traditional art forms and communicating to the world in contemporary contexts to keep them relevant. So it's not just a matter of creating strength in diplomacy, but it's also about keeping the dialogue alive and making the stage bigger. And we see that, I think, in other progressive countries that are thinking about ways in which their efforts to communicate are, there's a strong need for them to connect. Colombia is very much at the forefront right now. We're seeing it from some of the emerging European nations as well. So I think the answer to your question in terms of the solution is understanding the value of diversity and keeping ears open for diverse voices, regardless of the political and diplomatic nature of the reason why it's put out there.
Right. James?
I think we have to try to avoid an immediate kind of resolution of this and a kind of immediate pragmatism, even as we live in the real world where we have to do our day-to-day work, we have to raise funds and the like. We need a longer, deeper term debate that really puts the citizen artist, I underscore citizen, not just the performative dimension, the citizen intellectual, I underscore citizen, not just the public space interpretive part, in engaging government and reframing the context of the debate. Who are the most imaginative, creative people that we associate those terms with? They're artists and intellectuals. So we are in a position where we're petitioning government to do for us rather than saying to government they are the stewards of the citizen. That's the point. They are the stewards of the citizen. And unless we turn this debate, we're going to be sort of hat in hand, as Americans for the Arts are, with such slogans as art equals jobs. Well, I don't know any artists who are trying to do art simply to make money. In fact, I know a lot of well-trained, highly educated artists, it's an oxymoron, who are starving artists because they cannot live without dealing with that creativity. It seems like a paradox. So we've got to take a longer range view of a participatory citizenship with the interpretive and creative people at the forefront. Last point. In the discussions of participatory democracy going on in Latin America, a lot is about foregrounding the profound things that ordinary citizens do. And we have got to open up our dialogue to see that all artists come from some community, and most of them come from quote-unquote ordinary people. But our discourse has artists on the screen, on the stage, intellectuals in the books and in the university, and then there is the audience.
Right.
And so we've got to change the nature, I think, of our debate, and that, even as we do our practical work, and that calls for a different kind of concert. Let me just stop on this point, giving Cuba as one example, as you mentioned Colombia. Cuba is a country that looks largely like me. You would not know that from whatever spectrum you sit on the ideological, whatever place you sit in the ideological spectrum. There's a huge debate going on about racism inside Cuba by socialist Cubans and patriots. And where is that coming from mostly? It's coming from the Union of Artists and Writers. Now that is a discussion at level of scale. Where is the question about gay and lesbian rights coming mostly in Cuba outside of the institute that deals with sex education? It's coming from artists and intellectuals. And so even as they have to beg for practical things, they are committed to a larger debate. Colombia is a country mired in war, where most of the people who are suffering from that are people who look like me, Afro-descendants. But yet they have these wonderful theatrical and film things going on. And so we have to be a little careful, even as we support that, we don't let that block out the larger democratic questions. And that is where we in the arts cultural world, I think, have to take ourselves even more serious than we do in our citizenship from a kind of horizontal or contextual perspective, rather than from our niche. And that's a long-term debate that we need to start.
Eileen, thank you.
the old phrase, art from adversity. You used the word hierarchy, and I thought of hierarchy of culture through funding. And as an example, the Arts Council of England is a very important funder, but of course some of their policies don't allow funding for something more subversive or challenging types of work. So the type of work that can be produced can be marginalized. But then I think that with digital technology and the internet and the reduced cost of technology, such as Nick's mobile phone, anyone can produce digital media. And the joy of digital media is that can be distributed around the world in the matter of nanoseconds. And if you look at Tiffany's work, how people can respond to the notion of interdependence through digital technology. And then you get crowdfunding, which again through digital technology you can get the individuals supporting the artworks that they want to see, not necessarily that government or private sector funding would support, but individuals are putting their money where their mouth is and choosing to support work that they want to see. So that, as again a definition of interdependence, gives me a little more faith in the human race.
Thank you. Jakob.
Yeah, who produces these hierarchies? Normally it's the public or the private audience, the subsidies or the decision by the many who consider one or the other more important. I once experienced a nice story in Ladakh. This is 4,000 meters up in the Himalayan. And the kids had a game. They were shooting arrows. And the result was the winner would be ridiculed, the loser would be cuddled and, hugged, because he needed sort of a kind of support, whereas the winner had always the danger of, becoming arrogant. So this, in a way, it's education of the audience, what I suggest, that art as such looks for uniqueness and has a highly individualistic concept and aura. So what the audience does is actually what these kids do, ridicule or cuddle or hug. But it's difficult the moment you listen to Bob Dylan or Bruce Springsteen and let the public decide who is more important. And we have to educate every one of us. And I think there were several recommendations. And James, I'm very grateful for your introducing the complexity of culture. It is not that culture as such is anything good or bad. It can be corrupted to the terrible. And you mentioned Christo. Actually, he wrapped our house first, but he considers us an illegitimate child and would never come back. Doesn't want to be quoted with that. So you say within the life of an artist, he has his own attitude, and I think we have to mature and enlighten us in order to help to make hierarchy acceptable.
Haring.
Cultural hierarchy, there are surprising cultural traits in my country. Evil practices with the cultures also are included in our country. Even girls mensurated first are considered not touchable. No one is allowed to touch them. They are behaved differently. Discrimination is found there, and they are deprived of human rights at that point. In some places there are polygamy. There is polygamy. That is like an able practice. And in some places, old ladies, old women who doesn't have his husband, single lady, single woman, and poor in the society, is told as witch, wizard, witch, or charged, and they are neglected from society. Such evils are found in our culture, cultural traits. Hierarchy, which culture is good, better, or best? It cannot be decided by any definition. People accept some cultures from the tradition, even if they are not good from scientific point of view, from social point of view, from progressive point of view, they are harmful. In our country, even some lower caste people are called untouchables. We don't touch them. Even in my family, some of our forefathers, family members, don't allow us to enter in the houses of them, like shoemakers, tailors, and kami, sarki, damai. They are called in this way. They are neglected. However, they are very useful. They plow field for us. They make vessels for us. They make clothes for us. They tailor. But they are said, they are judged to be untouchables. This is not good. From human right point of view, they are deprived. They are not enjoying human rights. Even if the democracy definition cannot work, by law, certainly they are free, but by practice, they are not free. They are suffering. They have been suffering very much since long, for many years. And how to make hierarchies of culture, how to promote good cultures, how to make international culture, how to make mix-up culture. Perhaps it is the subject of cultural diplomacy, which can be well expressed by our honorable sirs and madams. That's all.
Thank you, Hari. Well, that brings us to the end of our time. In closing, drawing these thoughts together, what I'm hearing is that we have to make an effort to listen, to break down the expectations of hierarchy, and to reach out across frontiers. To listen is a duty, and we must listen with discipline and with eclecticism. And I want to thank this wonderful panel for coming together this afternoon to really open up this question in ways that I didn't expect. And thank you so much for all being together, and thank you for listening.